The signal arrived before the ship did. That was the first wrong thing. Every vessel in conquered space, military, civilian, cargo hauler, diplomatic runner, broadcast its identity code on approach. Name, registry, point of origin, intended destination. Standard. Automatic. The kind of thing that happened so reliably that no one in the conquered fleet had thought about it in 200 years. It was like breathing. It simply happened. This signal was not an identity code. Commander Zirath Vel Ashen was in the middle of reviewing a supply dispute between two colony stations on the edge of Expansion Arm 3 when his communications officer went quiet in a way that was not normal quiet. Normal quiet was the absence of sound. This was the kind of quiet that had weight to it, the kind that pressed against the inside of the bridge like something trying to get out. Zirath had 7 arms. He used 2 of them to set down his documents. The bioluminescent patterns along his skin, which shifted with his mood the way weather shifts across an open field, went from the pale blue of mild boredom to something that had no clean name, a greenish gray that his crew had learned, over 6 years of service, meant their commander had noticed something he did not yet have a category for. He hated that feeling more than anything in the galaxy. "Report," he said. His communications officer, a young Pelhari with 3 eyes and the nervous habit of blinking all 3 at different times, pulled up the frequency display. Every band, every channel, military, civilian, diplomatic, the old emergency frequencies that hadn't been used in living memory. All of them filled. The same signal on every single one. Zirath leaned forward. His skin went fully gray. The signal was a question. Translated from the broadcast frequency into Velhari Standard, it read, "Are you ready?" That was it, nothing else. No identity code, no registry, no point of origin. Just those 3 words, looping, patient, filling every frequency in the local sector like water filling a room. Not violently, not with any urgency at all, just steadily, completely, until there was no space left that it had not reached. "Source?" Zirath asked. "We're still," the officer blinked all 3 eyes at once, which he never did. "We're still trying to lock it. Commander, the signal is also broadcasting in Dravisi, and in Old Harathi, and in," he stopped. "Commander, this 4th dialect. Xenolinguistics says it's a language they haven't finished translating yet. They've had the source text for 60 years. They haven't finished it. It is broadcasting in a language we don't fully understand." "Yes, sir." "And the source we haven't located." "We're close, sir. The signal is coming from," the officer looked at his display, looked away, looked back. "Arm 3 outer edge. Something just dropped out of FTL." Every head on the bridge turned toward the forward display. It was large. That was the first thing. Not large the way a fleet carrier was large. Large the way a mountain is large. The way something is large when the scale of it makes your eyes try to do math they were never built to do. The ship, if it was a ship, if ship was the right word for something that sat in the void like a sleeping god, was dark. No running lights. No engine glow. Nothing that suggested power or life or purpose. Just mass, just age. Just that signal, pouring out of it on every frequency, patient as stone. "Get me a full scan," Zirath said. His voice was level. His skin was the color of old ash. "Everything, hull composition, power readings, life signs, weapons systems. I want all of it." The scan took 4 minutes. That was the second wrong thing. Scans of vessels that size should have taken 40 seconds. The ship's hull was doing something to the scanning instruments, not blocking them, not jamming them, simply making them work harder, as if the ship was old enough that the scanners had to stop and think about it. The results came back. Zirath read them, then he read them again. Hull material, a carbon composite alloy that the Concord's material science database flagged as asterisk pre-industrial synthesis, meaning it was made by a civilization that no longer had the tools to make it. The hull was a relic, a remnant, something built with knowledge that had been lost. Carbon dating put its age at 12,000 years. Power signature, 0. The ship was cold, not damaged, cold. The kind of cold that came from a very long time of doing nothing. No reactor, no stored energy, no drive system operating. Whatever had moved this vessel had stopped moving it a long time ago. Life signs, none. Weapons, none detected. Trajectory, Xyrath stared at this one for a long time. The vessel had no engine operating, no thrust, no drive. It had come out of FTL and it was moving, not drifting, not coasting in a random direction the way an unpowered object would, but aimed, locked onto a heading with the precision of a fired shot, as if someone had pointed it at a specific destination 12,000 years ago, pulled the trigger, and let physics do the rest. The destination it was aimed at was the Concord's capital system. Xyrath's communications officer spoke. "Commander, there's a manifest in the broadcast signal, buried in the data. Xenolinguistics just pulled it." "Read it." The officer looked at his screen. He did not look away from it when he spoke, which meant he was doing the thing that beings do when they need their eyes on something familiar, because what they are saying is not familiar at all. Cargo manifest, one line, one entry. The officer's voice was careful the way a man is careful carrying something fragile across a long distance. It reads, cargo one species, dormant. The bridge was quiet. One species. Not one creature. Not one member of a species, the way a diplomatic vessel might carry an ambassador. One asterisk species. The word implied numbers that Xyrath's mind tried to calculate and then stopped, because the ship was big enough and the word was specific enough, that the number his mind was arriving at was large in a way that made the inside of his chest feel hollow. He pulled up the Xeno catalog. He punched in the vessel's point of origin, the star system its trajectory mapped back to 12,000 years of spacetime geometry unwound to a single backwater point. A dim star. 4 planets, Arm 6 far from anything, the kind of system that got a 3-sentence assessment and a recommendation to check back later. He found the file. It was 3 sentences long. System Sol 7741 Arm 6. Primary life-bearing world, 3rd planet. Dominant species. 1. Carbon-based, bilaterally symmetrical, prestellar technology shows early signs of organized civilization. Recommend reassessment in 10,000 years. He checked the timestamp on the recommendation. 11,847 years ago. He sat there, 7 arms perfectly still, skin the color of a dead thing. Nobody had scheduled the reassessment. It had been sitting in the catalog for 11,000 years, that little flag, check back in 10,000 years, and it had sailed past its own deadline and kept sailing. And no one had noticed because the catalog had 400,000 entries and the system was backwater and prestellar, and had shown early signs of organized civilization, which was not the same as being interesting. Xyrath looked at the manifest again, 1 species, dormant. He looked at the ship, cold, enormous, aimed, 12,000 years old, closing the distance between itself and the conquered capital at a speed that had nothing to do with its engines and everything to do with momentum that had been building for longer than most conquered civilizations had existed. He thought about what dormant meant. He thought about what 1 species meant. He thought about a ship that size, and he thought about how many of something you could carry in a ship that size if you packed them carefully, and he thought about what aimed meant when nothing was aiming it. Then he stopped thinking about all of it, because thinking about it was getting him somewhere he was not ready to go. "Get me the first expansion fleet," he said. His communications officer turned. "Sir. All 47 ships, full mobilization. I want them on an intercept heading within the hour." He was already pulling up the tactical display. His skin had settled into something new, not the gray of confusion, not the blue of routine, but a deep, flat red that his crew had only ever seen once before, 3 years ago, during the Heth Corridor engagement, when the situation had moved past complicated into the kind of territory where the only useful thing was to act. "Are we treating this as a hostile contact?" the officer asked. Xyrath looked at the forward display, the ship, the dark, enormous patient. 12,000-year-old ship, broadcasting its three-word question into every frequency it could reach. "Are you ready?" "I don't know what we're treating it as," he said. "That's why I want 47 ships." The fleet mobilized. The fastest military response in conquered history, a record that would be noted in the after-action reports, assuming anyone wrote after-action reports, assuming there was an after. 47 warships moved into position, arrayed in the defensive formation that had broken 3 invasions and ended 2 wars, the formation that the conquered military academy used as its first lesson in applied force, the formation that said, "Whatever you are, we are more." The vessel did not change course. It did not accelerate. It did not arm. It did not respond to the fleet's presence in any way that instruments could detect. It simply continued, moving through space the way old things move, not with speed, not with urgency, but with the particular unstoppability of something that has already decided where it is going and has no interest in discussing the matter. The signal kept broadcasting. "Are you ready?" On every frequency, in every language, including 3 that had been dead for 6 centuries. Including one that the conquered's best xenolinguists had been trying to understand for 60 years, and still hadn't finished. Zyreth watched it come. He was a being who had spent his career putting things into categories, threat or not threat, known or unknown, manageable or not. His entire value to the conquered military was his ability to look at a situation, find the right box, put the situation in it, and act accordingly. He looked at this. He could not find a box. For the first time in 6 years of command, across 30 engagements and 2 full-scale wars, Commander Zyreth Vel Ashen sat in his chair on the bridge of the Conquered's flagship and felt something move through him that he didn't have a name for. It wasn't fear, he knew fear. Fear was familiar, manageable, a thing that sharpened the mind. This was something else, something quieter. Something that felt, in a way he would not examine until much later, like the moment just before an answer arrives. When you have been carrying a question so long you forgot it was a question, and something in the universe finally decides you are ready to hear it. "Are you ready?" The ship came on. Zyreth did not send soldiers. He had 47 warships and enough firepower to crack a moon, and he sent one unarmed civilian shuttle carrying a single passenger who was technically retired and had complained loudly about being woken up. Archivist Sane of the Dravesi had been asleep in her cabin aboard the research vessel *3 Clarity when the commander's call reached her. She was 160 years old, which for Dravesi was middle-aged, old enough to have filed away more knowledge than most institutions held, young enough to still be annoyed about being woken up. Her species were thread memory beings, which meant they didn't store knowledge in external devices the way most civilizations did. They stored it in themselves. In the specific texture of their nerve clusters, in the organized lattice of their long memory. Sane had cataloged 4,000 civilizations across 6 decades of fieldwork. When she moved through a new space, she felt its age the way some beings felt temperature, as a thing on the skin, immediate and real. She had agreed to board the vessel because Zyreth had said 2 things to her that he probably should not have said over an open channel. He had said, "It's 12,000 years old." And then he had said, "I can't categorize it." Sane had been putting on her coat before he finished the second sentence. The shuttle crossed the distance to the vessel in 40 minutes. 47 warships held formation around it, all weapons hot, all shields at maximum. The vessel sat in the center of that formation, the way a stone sits in a ring of candles, not threatened, not threatening, simply there, radiating patience in all directions. The signal was still going. Sane heard it through the shuttle's speakers, looping and calm, in every language she recognized, and several she almost recognized, and one that made the back of her memory light up in a way that was uncomfortable, like pressing on a bruise. "Are you ready?" "Yes," she said, to no one, which was a thing she did sometimes and had stopped apologizing for. The airlock was the first thing that told her something was deeply different about this ship, Airlocks on vessels this old, on anything, really, required interface. You needed to broadcast a request, or physically manipulate the external seal, or in some cases cut through it if the ship was truly dead. This airlock opened, on its own, before the shuttle had finished docking, as if the ship had been watching them approach and had simply decided they could come in. Sane stood in the open airlock and felt the age of it. Not metaphorically. Literally, the way she felt age as a dravisy in her thread memory, a kind of pressure and depth, like standing at the edge of something very deep and knowing the depth without seeing the bottom. The ship was 12,000 years old in the way that mountains were old. Not worn out, just settled. The kind of old that had stopped being interested in time because time had stopped being interesting. The corridors were lit. That was the second thing. The scans had read 0 power, no active systems, and yet the corridors were lit, not brightly, not with the clean white of modern lighting systems, but with a warm, amber glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves, as if the material of the ship remembered what light was and had decided to produce it out of habit. She walked. The corridors stretched ahead of her in a straight line, then curved gently to the right, then opened into wider passages, then narrowed, then opened again. The architecture was not alien in the way that most truly alien architecture was alien, built on a geometry or a logic that reflected a mind nothing like your own. This was almost familiar, proportioned for something roughly her own height, roughly her own width. Rooms off the main corridor sealed with doors she could have operated herself if they weren't locked. The whole ship built around a scale of being that she recognized without being able to say exactly why. She was 3 kilometers in before she hit the chambers. The corridor opened up. The ceiling went away. The corridor became a cavern, massive, soaring, lit with that same amber glow, and on both sides of her, for as far ahead as she could see, were sealed compartments, each one the size of a city block, each one humming, not with power exactly, with something that her instruments registered as a biological signature, and then registered an error because the biological signature was not active. It was asterisk stored. It was life in a form that had been slowed to the point where it was almost not life, and almost not anything else, suspended in a state that her reference text would later call asterisk deep dormancy, and her gut called asterisk waiting. She counted the chambers. 150, 100, 500. She stopped counting at 4,000 because the corridor was still going, and she had run out of the particular kind of mental energy that counting requires when each number is a city block full of dormant life. She called Zyreth. "I'm in the cargo hold," she said. "Can you tell what's in the chambers?" he asked. "Not yet, but Commander, I've been walking for 20 minutes since I entered this section. The hold is still going." She looked ahead. The amber glow continued into the distance, steady and even. This ship is bigger on the inside than it looks. Which was not physically possible, and yet. She didn't say that part, she kept walking. The core of the ship was another 30 minutes in. She emerged from the chamber corridor into a room that was, by comparison, small, the size of a large meeting hall, circular, walls lined floor to ceiling with something she had never seen outside of theoretical papers. Quantum crystalline data storage. Sane had read about it. Every xenolinguist who worked with pre-modern civilizations had read about it, the way you read about mythological creatures, as a real thing that existed once, a technology that several civilizations had theorized, and none had ever successfully implemented. Because the precision required to encode data in a quantum crystalline lattice at the density the theorists described was so extreme that most species gave up and built bigger computers instead. The walls were full of it, floor to ceiling, every surface. Her instruments tried to measure the data volume. They returned a number. Then they returned an error because the number they had returned was not a number that her instruments were designed to handle, not because it was wrong, but because it was right, and what it was right about was a quantity of stored information so large that her instrument's error was essentially them saying, "We were not built to count this high." She stood in the center of the room for a moment, just stood there. Then she reached out and placed her hand against the nearest crystal surface. Her thread memory lit up like a map of the galaxy. The contact was not painful, but it was overwhelming, not noise, not chaos, but depth. The sensation of something that had been storing information for 12,000 years, recognizing contact, and presenting what was stored the way a library presents its catalog. She pulled her hand back, breathed, reached again more carefully with the trained precision of a field archivist who knew how to sample without drowning. She pulled one file. The file opened in her thread memory as a structured document, organized, labeled, meticulous. A profile, complete biological and psychological record, genetic baseline data, cultural development timeline, observed history annotated, projections. She read the name at the top of the file. Dravesi. Her people. Sane stood very still. The amber light did not care about this. The ship did not care. The crystals held their data with the same patient completeness they had held it for 12,000 years, indifferent to the fact that the being reading it was the subject of it, indifferent to the specific quality of wrongness that comes from finding yourself documented by something that should not have known you existed. The file was thorough in a way that was almost gentle, every detail noted, every crisis in Dravesi history annotated, every near-extinction catalogued with clinical care. She scrolled through it with her thread memory, years of training keeping her moving when instinct wanted her to stop. At the bottom of the file, intervention notes. 17 of them, spanning 11,000 years. Sane read them. Each one was brief, a date, an action, a note about expected outcomes. Careful, professional, the way field reports are careful and professional when the person writing them wants the record to reflect that they were doing their job properly. Intervention 3. Introduced drought-resistant grain variant to northern settlements via undirected spore dispersal. Projected starvation event averted. Species population stable. Intervention 9. Removed genetic sequence encoding for territorial aggression in isolated northern population. Crossbreeding will distribute change across species within 4 generations. Recommend monitoring. Intervention 14. Redirected asteroid 7741A6229 via gravitational buffer deployed at L4 point. Extinction level impact averted. Species unaware. The most recent intervention note was dated 3,400 years ago. It read, subject species showing accelerated development in xenolinguistic fields, cultural diplomacy frameworks emerging, development on track, no further intervention required at this stage. Sane sat down on the floor. Not a decision, not a graceful lowering of herself. Her legs simply stopped participating in the project of holding her up, and she sat down on the floor of a dead ship, surrounded by 12,000 years of archived data, and looked at the word asterisk intervention until it stopped looking like a word and started looking like what it was. They had been managed, her people. For 11,000 years, someone had been watching them and nudging them, and saving them from things they never knew were coming, and removing pieces of their nature that might have killed them and they had never known. They had written their own history and called it their own history and believed it was their own history, and all of it, every crisis survived, every war that didn't happen, every disaster that missed, had been shaped by hands they had never seen. Her call to Zyreth was very calm. She was proud of that later. Commander, she said, pull the Xeno catalog. I'm monitoring your feed, archivist. What did you? Every species in the Concord, all 41, pull every file. She looked at the crystal walls, checked the intervention notes. Silence on the line. Then, we don't have intervention notes. First contact protocols prohibit any action on pre-contact species. The Concord has never. Not our notes, Commander. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. Archivist, what are you telling me? Sane looked at the wall. 41 civilizations, in those crystals, complete records, every file with those same intervention annotations, Every species in the most powerful galactic civilization ever assembled, documented, monitored, and managed by something that had filed a three-sentence assessment 12,000 years ago, and then gotten to work. "I'm telling you," she said carefully, the way you say things that cannot be unsaid, "that we have records on this ship for every member species of the Conquered. And each file has documentation of external interventions that we did not know about and did not consent to." She paused. "And I have just read my own file, so I need you to understand that I am not panicking. I am making a professional report. There is a difference." A very long pause from Zareth's end. "How many interventions?" he asked. His voice was different, flat in a way it hadn't been before. 17 for my people. I don't know about the others. Commander, open the Velhari file. Read it yourself." Another pause. "I'll review all 41 files," he said. "Open yours first," she said. He didn't answer, but she heard the sound of him accessing his terminal, and the specific quality of the silence that followed was the silence of a man who had just started reading something he was not ready for, in a room full of people who were also not ready for it, on a ship that was the most powerful military vessel in the known galaxy, surrounded by 46 others exactly like it. None of which mattered anymore. None of which had ever mattered in the way they thought. Above the ship, the broadcast continued its patient loop. "Are you ready?" It was starting to sound like a different kind of question. Sane spent 6 days in the core of the ship. She slept in 4-hour stretches on a folded thermal blanket she'd brought from the shuttle, ate from a supply pack, and read. For 6 days, she sat in the amber light of a room full of crystalline data, her thread memory working the way it had been trained to work, methodically, carefully, without the kind of emotional interference that would slow her down. She was a professional. She had spent 60 years reading the histories of civilizations that were not her own, and she knew how to maintain the particular distance that made the work possible. That distance lasted about 12 hours. Then she stopped maintaining it and just read, because some things are too large for professional distance, and trying to hold that kind of space between yourself and something that large is like trying to hold back a tide with your hands. Technically something you can attempt, not something that works. The mission logs were not what she expected. She had expected orders, a mission brief from some central authority, instructions for what to do and where to go. The kind of documentation a military or government operation would generate. She found none of that. What she found, instead, were personal logs, written by individual crew members over the duration of a voyage that she had to read 3 times before she understood its shape, because her mind kept rejecting what it was reading as a mistake. The ship had not traveled for 12,000 years. It had waited for 12,000 years. There was a difference, and the difference mattered. The logs described a departure, a single star system, a blue world, a civilization that was just beginning to understand what was beyond its own sky. A crew of, she counted the individual writing voices, at least 40. Men and women, she thought, though the terms felt strange applied to beings she was only now beginning to understand existed. They had loaded their cargo and sealed their chambers and set their course, and then, instead of traveling, had parked the ship at the edge of a brown dwarf 30 light-years from the destination, and shut down every active system and waited. On a timer. The logs described why. The civilization they were returning to, the one whose development they had been monitoring and managing for 11,000 years, the 41 species spread across 6 galaxy arms that would come to call themselves the Conquered, was not ready. The crew had checked. The maturation projections, run against real-time data from their monitoring network, had come back short. Another 1,000 years, maybe 2. So they waited. The logs covered the first 300 years of waiting. After that, the individual voices went quiet, one by one, as each crew member entered a chamber of their own. The last log was written by a woman. Sane had begun to understand the gender patterns in their writing, who identified herself only by a function title, not a name, and who wrote with the kind of deliberate calm that Sane recognized from her own best reports. The calm of someone who has thought a thing all the way through and is now just recording it. The last log read, in translation: "This is the final entry before primary crew enters dormancy. The garden is progressing. We've made our adjustments and our corrections and our interventions, and I truly believe, that they will be all right. Some of them will be more than all right. The Velhari surprised us. The Dravesi surprised us. Honestly, most of them surprised us, which I think says something encouraging about what life does when you give it room to grow. We will wake up to something we are proud of, or we will not wake up at all, and either way the work will have been worth doing." Set the wake timer, set the approach vector, rest. She stayed with that last entry for a long time. Then she kept reading. The ship's automated systems, which had continued running at low power, maintaining the cargo, monitoring the galaxy outside, had kept their own logs. Shorter, less human, more like data tables than writing, but she could read them. They recorded in dry and factual language every signal the ship's passive monitoring systems had picked up from conquered space over 10,000 years. Political developments, wars, the forming of alliances, the building of the relay network they called the Conquered. The expansion. The automated logs noted each development with a rating, a simple scale, 1 to 10, measuring something the system labeled asterisk readiness. She watched the number climb across thousands of years. Slowly, with setbacks. There were decades where the number dropped: wars, extinctions of smaller civilizations, moments where the whole project seemed to wobble and then climbed again. Slowly. The way plants grow or children learn to walk. The system had set the wake threshold at 8. The Conquered's readiness score had hit 8.2, 14 months ago. That was when the timer had ended. When the ship had woken, when the chambers had begun their slow cycle back toward active life, when the approach vector had engaged and the ship had begun to move, cold and dark and aimed, toward the heart of the civilization it had been tending since before the oldest living member of that civilization's oldest species had been born. Sane sat with this for a long time. The amber light held steady around her. The ship did not care about what she was feeling, which was, in a strange way, comforting. She thought about the word the logs used. Again and again, across 12,000 years of documentation, in the personal logs and the automated records and the intervention notes and the mission brief, which she eventually found, buried deep in the archive, dated 11,900 years ago, written in a language she was still partially guessing at. The word was asterisk garden. Not asterisk project, not experiment, not colony asterisk or operation or mission. Garden. Something you plant and tend and water and protect from frost, and then step back from and let grow in whatever direction it grows. And sometimes you prune it, and sometimes you stake it so it doesn't fall, and sometimes you walk out one morning and find it has become something you didn't plan and are completely unprepared for and love anyway. Sane was not entirely sure what she felt about being a garden. She was not entirely sure she had the right to feel anything about it at all, since the garden had not been consulted about being a garden, and consultation is generally considered a courtesy. She filed that thought away and kept reading, because this was her job, and her job was what she had when everything else became too large to hold. On the 4th day, she found the second archive. It was smaller than the first, tucked into a separate crystalline structure behind the main storage wall, and it contained a single catalog, not of conquered species, not of interventions and adjustments and saved civilizations. It was a catalog of asterisk other gardens. Sane read the first entry and went still. A different galaxy, a different cluster of civilizations, managed, tended, brought to maturity. The file was closed, marked asterisk complete, with a date that was 40,000 years in the past. The second entry, another galaxy, another garden complete. The third, the fourth. She counted 14 completed gardens before she stopped counting, because the implication of the count was something she was not ready to sit with yet. The implication being that the Conquered was not the first, or the only, or the most important, but simply the most recent, in a project that was older than most civilizations in this galaxy had any concept of age. The beings responsible for this had been doing it for longer than Sane had words for. She called Zyrath on the 6th day. She had compiled her report. She had triple-checked her translations. She had written and rewritten her summary until it was as clean and precise as she could make it, stripped of the 6 days of complicated emotion that she had done her feeling in private and was now done with professionally. "I'm ready to transmit my full report," she said. Zyrath's voice was different from how it had sounded 6 days ago. Quieter, more careful. She had learned, over 2 decades of working with conquered military commanders, to read the specific quality of their silences. This one told her he had opened the Velhari file, possibly more than once. "Send it," he said. She sent it. Aboard the flagship, Zyrath received a document that was, by the standards of military intelligence reports, extraordinarily long and detailed, and by the standards of what it was actually describing, extraordinarily short. He read it standing up at his command console, because he had sat down halfway through the first page and then stood up again, because sitting felt wrong, because his body wanted to do something and there was nothing to do. 41 species, the entire conquered, every civilization that had built this empire, the Velhari, the Dravisi, the Pelhari, the Harathi, the 37 others, all of them planted, tended, guided, saved, and shaped by the same hands over the same impossibly long stretch of time. Every war that had ended before it ended the species. Every disease that had missed. Every collision course with extinction that had somehow turned. Not luck. Not the strength of their own civilizations. Gardening. He forwarded the report to the Imperial Council without comment, because there was no comment that would have added anything. 3 counselors resigned before the end of the day. One of them, a Harathi who had written 17 books on the natural development of civilizations and the inherent strength of species who survive through their own will, did not resign, but also did not speak for 48 hours and would later describe the experience as the noise in my mind simply stopped, and I had to wait for it to start again. The 4th counselor, Velhari, 200 years old, had governed through 7 wars and 3 extinction-level threats, the kind of being who had passed through enough history that not much could surprise her anymore, read the report and folded her hands and asked the only question that mattered. What do they want? No one answered. Because at that exact moment, the broadcast from the vessel changed. 6 days of "Are you ready?" cut off in the middle of a loop. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then the new message began. It was shorter than the old one, only 2 words. The xenolinguistics team translated it in seconds, because unlike the old broadcast, this one was in Concord standard, clear, direct. The kind of language you use when you have decided that the time for patience with the language barrier is over. The new message read, "Good, we're coming." In the core of the ship, Sane heard the change in the broadcast and closed the crystalline archive and sat in the amber light and said, very quietly to herself, "I have seen everything." She didn't say it the way she used to. She used to say it with a certain satisfaction. The satisfaction of a being who has traveled far and learned much and measured herself against the full breadth of the galaxy, and found that she was adequate to it. She said it now the way you say a thing when you have just discovered it is not true, has never been true, and you are not sure yet what to say instead. Outside in the fleet, 47 warships held position around a ship full of sleeping cargo, waiting for orders that no one had figured out how to give yet. The message looped. "Good, we're coming." Sane looked at the archive. She looked at 14 closed gardens, each one older than the Conquered's memory of itself. She thought, then we had better decide what we are before they arrive. She was not sure they had time. The War Council met for 6 hours. This was considered efficient for a governing body comprising representatives of 41 species, most of whom disagreed about everything on a good day, and this was not a good day. There were arguments. There were demands for additional reports, additional analysis, Additional time. There was one moment, roughly 3 hours in, where two counselors spoke at the same time in incompatible frequency ranges, and the combined sound was enough to rattle the chamber's acoustic dampeners and make the youngest member of the council, a Pelhari who had been appointed only 8 months ago, and had not yet fully understood what he'd signed up for, press himself flat against his chair and stare at the ceiling. The decision, when it came, was unanimous. That was the remarkable thing. 41 species, 6 hours, one unanimous decision. Destroy the vessel. The logic, laid out in the formal resolution, was clean and direct. The vessel was an unknown. The vessel had demonstrated capability beyond current conquered understanding. The message we're coming implied the arrival of additional forces, forces whose nature and scale were completely unknown. The window in which the conquered could act from a position of strength was closing. Act now. Act decisively. Eliminate the unknown before the unknown's reinforcements arrived. The logic was good. The logic was the kind of logic that had won wars. Xyrath read the resolution. He thought about the 12,000-year-old woman's log. I believe they will be all right. And thought about what the word all right meant when applied to a species that responded to things it didn't understand by shooting them. He transmitted the order. The first volley from 47 warships hit the vessel simultaneously. The combined firepower of the Conquered's finest military hardware, energy weapons, mass drivers, the 4 experimental antimatter charges that had never been used in actual combat, and whose operators had been somewhat nervous about this, struck the vessel across its full length and breadth. The vessel did not raise shields. It did not evade. It did not return fire. It burned. Beautifully, completely, the way very old and very large things burn when you apply enough energy. Not an explosion exactly, but a coming apart. A gradual dissolution into light and heat and debris that spread in a slow, luminous cloud through the surrounding space. The amber light that had lit its interior corridors scattered outward and faded. The signal cut off mid-loop, "Are you ready?" Ending halfway through the word *ready, the last syllable swallowed by static. The debris field glittered. The fleet held position. 11 minutes passed. Xyrath spent those 11 minutes watching his tactical display and feeling something he couldn't fully name, not guilt. He had made a defensible decision, not satisfaction. There was nothing satisfying about this. Something more like the feeling of having turned a corner and not yet seen what was on the other side. His skin had gone back to the gray it had been holding since he read the Velhari file, and it stayed there. At minute 12, every Conquered communication relay in Expansion Arm 3 went silent. Not jammed, not disrupted by interference. Silent, as if someone had reached into the infrastructure of interstellar communication, the relay network that the Conquered had built over 400 years, the backbone of everything, trade and military and diplomacy, the web that held 41 civilizations together and turned it off. Not destroyed, turned off. There is a difference, and the difference is this: things that are destroyed make noise. Things that are turned off simply stop. One moment the relays were transmitting. The next they were not. No blast, no disruption signal, no evidence of attack. Just absence spreading outward from the debris field at a speed that matched no weapon in the Conquered's catalog, moving along the relay network the way a hand moves along a line of switches. One, then the next, each one going dark in sequence. In 6 minutes, every relay in Arm 3 was silent. In 9 minutes, relays in adjacent arms began to go. Xyrath looked at his communications officer. His communications officer looked back. Both of them understood, in the specific way that experienced military personnel understand things they would prefer not to understand, that they were watching a demonstration. Not an attack. A demonstration. The relay network wasn't being destroyed. If it were being destroyed, there would be energy signatures, physical damage, debris. There was nothing. The relays were simply off, waiting. The same way the old ship had been waiting, parked at the edge of a brown dwarf, patient as stone until it was time. Something had been inside the relay network. Something had been inside it for a very long time. Then the new signal started. Not on Concord frequencies. On different ones, frequencies the Concord's instruments detected and registered and flagged as *unknown origin, unknown construction. Frequencies that existed in the spaces between the ones the Concorde used, invisible in the same way that a wire hidden in a wall is invisible until you turn on the current. A new network lighting up, built into the negative space of the Concorde's own infrastructure, running parallel to their relay lines, piggybacking on their comm towers, threaded through the architecture of 40 years of Concorde expansion like veins through a body, unseen, unfelt, running the whole time. Node by node, it activated. Xyrath watched his tactical display update in real time, dots appearing. The new network spreading across his display like a constellation assembling itself from darkness, taking shape one point at a time, and the shape it took was the shape of the Concorde's own expansion history. It matched. Every arm, every colony cluster, every deep space outpost. The hidden network was a mirror of the visible one, laid underneath it, older than the oldest Concorde relay by, his instruments told him, approximately 10,000 years. He sat down, he stood back up, he sat down again. In the core of the vessel's debris field, something was happening. His sensors caught it first as an anomaly, a power reading with no corresponding source, small, then growing, then resolving into a signal shape that was familiar because it had been the first thing, the signal that had arrived before the ship had, the broadcast that had started all of this. The signal was back. Not the question, not "are you ready?" Something different, something his instruments translated not as language but as a waveform pattern, and then his xenolinguistics team received the translation from the Dravesi Standard Reference Library, and it came out as a heartbeat. One heartbeat, slow and steady, broadcasting from where the vessel had been, radiating outward from the debris in all directions, carried on the new network's frequencies to every corner of Concord space. Thump. A pause. Thump. Like something waking up. Xyrath looked at the debris field, at where the ship had been. He thought about what the logs had said: one species, dormant, 4,000 chambers, cargo carried 12,000 years and parked and waited over and now moving again. He thought about what *dormant* meant. He thought about what it meant that the cargo hadn't been on the ship. The ship had been the advance notice, the signal, the message delivered on behalf of something that was already here, had always been here, had been here the whole time, moving through Concord space in the architecture of the hidden network, patient and dark and bidding. Commander. His navigation officer, voice very controlled. There is a vessel dropping out of FTL. A pause. Inside expansion Arm 3 perimeter. Range. It's not. Another pause. Xyrath recognized the quality of it, the pause of someone doing math and getting an answer they need to check. Commander, it's inside the capital system's orbital perimeter. Silence on the bridge. Inside the defense grid, the officer added. More silence. It is currently sitting in the no-fly zone, directly above the Imperial Council chambers, sir. Xyrath looked at his display. A single dot, small, far smaller than the vessel they had just destroyed. A ship the size of a diplomatic runner, quick and light. The kind of thing you used when you wanted to get somewhere fast and didn't need to bring an army. It was making no aggressive moves. It had raised no shields. It had armed nothing. It simply sat there, above the heart of the conquered civilization, in a space that should have been physically impossible to enter without triggering 17 layers of automated defense systems, all of which had apparently decided not to respond, or had been politely asked not to, or had been turned off from inside by something that had been inside them for a very long time. The new network was fully active now. Sane, running the numbers in the core of the debris field, would later estimate that over the course of the 40 minutes following the vessel's destruction, the hidden network had transmitted, on its own frequencies, directly to every inhabited conquered world, system, and station, approximately 12,000 years of human data. Science, history, art, engineering, medical knowledge, agricultural methods, the specific accumulated knowledge of a civilization that had over 12,000 years figured out how to persist. Not weaponized, not a threat, simply given, delivered to every conquered database with the same patient, generous completeness with which you might hand someone a book. Here, you should have this, you've earned it. The galaxy burned the way a city burns when every light comes on at once, not in destruction, but in illumination, sudden and total, every dark corner reached, every shadow resolved, the shape of everything finally visible. The heartbeat continued on every frequency. Thumping, thumping. Then the small ship above the Imperial Council chambers sent one transmission. Clear calm, in Concord Standard, the version of Concord Standard that the Concord itself used, with the correct grammatical structures and the current idiom, not the version from 12,000 years ago or 11,000 or 4,000. But now, the way it was spoken in the capital today, learned the way someone learns a language when they have been listening to it being born. The transmission was 4 words. Ready when you are. Xyrath sat at his command console and looked at his display. 47 warships in formation around a debris field. A hidden network lighting up across 6 galaxy arms. A small ship sitting in the most protected airspace in the Concord's history like it had always been allowed to be there. He thought about the War Council's logic, the clean, good logic, the eliminate the unknown logic. He thought about the last log entry, rest. He thought about what it meant that the being who had written that log had planned for this exact response, had known it was coming, had included it probably in the maturation model, the readiness score, as an expected data point. 8.2. He reached for his communication panel. He opened a channel to the Imperial Council chambers. Tell them, he said, to open the door. The council chamber had held emperors and war criminals and the last survivors of dying civilizations and delegations from species who communicated through methods that required the chamber's full environmental control system to be replaced for the duration of the meeting. It had never held anything like this. The human walked in alone. No guard, no entourage. No ceremonial dress or weapons or the kind of display that beings use when they want to signal power before they've opened their mouths. Just a person, one person, moving through the great carved entrance of the Imperial Council chamber at a pace that was neither hurried nor ceremonial, the pace of someone who had somewhere to be and was not late. The human was, by any standard the 41 assembled counselors had available to them, unremarkable to look at. Medium height. Middle-aged by a scale none of them had a reference point for, dark hair, cut practically, wearing clothes that were clean and well-made and drew no attention to themselves, carrying in one hand a single data chip. What the counselors noticed, all 41 of them, later in separate debriefs that they gave to separate analysts, each of whom noted the same detail, was the quality of the way the human moved through the room, the particular unhurried confidence of it. Not arrogance. Arrogance is performed, and this was not performed. It was simply the way someone moves when they have time, when they have always had time, when the concept of needing to rush has been so far outside their civilization's experience for so long that their bodies no longer know what urgency feels like. The human sat in the chair that had been placed across from the council, a plain chair, facing 41 of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. Looked at them. Said, "You have questions." Not a question, an acknowledgement. The kind of thing you say when you have been listening to something be built for 10,000 years and know the shape of it by now. The questions came. The Concord is nothing if not organized, and the council had spent the hours since the asterisk ready when you are transmission preparing, and the first questions were the ones they had agreed were most important, the most formal ones, the ones that contained, under their official language, the structure of accusation. Why? How? Who gave you the right? The human answered all of them. The why was this: Earth 12,000 years ago was dying, not metaphorically, not in the way civilizations like to dramatize their crises. Literally, the atmosphere, the ecosystems, the systems that kept the planet alive failing, and the civilization on it aware of the failure and unable to fully stop it in time. They had the technology to leave. They did not have anywhere to go. The galaxy was full of worlds and empty of people, and a species with no one to talk to in all that vast and quiet dark is a species looking at a very long and very lonely death. They could have colonized, taken worlds, built their own empire. They built a garden instead. The how was 12,000 years of patience, of a generation ship that became something else, a seed vault, a monitor station, a caretaker vessel carrying 41 carefully selected species in dormancy, while its crew managed the living worlds below. Of hidden infrastructure threaded through the Concord's own expansion like roots beneath a forest floor. Of a civilization that had gone quiet, genuinely, completely quiet, to give the garden room to grow without the weight of being watched. The who gave you the right asterisk took longest. The human sat with that one for a moment, not avoiding it, just sitting with it, the way you sit with a question that deserves the full weight of a real answer instead of a quick one. No one, the human said. There was no authority we could have asked. There was no higher body to petition. We made a decision that we knew was not fully ours to make, and we made it anyway because the alternative was 41 empty planets and a galaxy that would never know what could have grown in it. A pause. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm not sure forgiveness is the right frame for it. I'm telling you we knew what we were doing. We chose it. And we've been living with that choice for 12,000 years. The chamber was quiet. The oldest counselor, the Velhari elder who had asked what the humans wanted 2 days ago, when the broadcast changed, spoke. And what do you want now, from us, from this meeting? Nothing you haven't already chosen to give. She tilted her head. Explain. The network, the human said, the data we transmitted, the 12,000 years of human knowledge we gave to every world in the Concord in the past 48 hours. We didn't ask for anything in return. We didn't attach conditions. You don't owe us anything for it. The human set the data chip on the table. That chip contains the access codes to the full hidden network. Everything, every node, every channel, the complete infrastructure. It's yours. We're not giving you access to it. We're transferring it to you. It becomes Concord infrastructure, governed by Concord law, the moment you take it. Another silence. That's it? The Pelhari counselor asked. Young, 8 months in the role, still capable of being surprised by things. You manage 41 civilizations for 12,000 years, and then you just give us the keys. The garden is grown, the human said. Gardeners don't own what grows. Xyrath had been standing at the back of the chamber. He had not been invited. He had arrived from the flagship 2 hours after the human had landed and had been permitted into the chamber because he was the ranking military officer, and because the guards at the door had, after looking at him for a moment, simply stepped aside. He had not spoken. He had stood at the back and listened and watched the human, and thought about the Velhari file that he had read 6 times now, and still wasn't sure he was done reading. He walked forward. The human looked at him, not with recognition, they had never met, but with the particular attention of someone who has been monitoring a species closely enough to recognize the quality of what it produces. The file, Xyrath said. The Velhari file, the intervention notes. Yes, the human said. The aggression suppression, the 17 adjustments. Yes. We thought we built this empire ourselves, Xyrath said, not an accusation. He had worked past accusation sometime in the last 6 days, just a statement laid out flat. Every war we won, every crisis we survived, every decision we made, we thought it was us. It was you, the human said. Xyrath's skin flickered. The interventions removed things that would have stopped you from being able to make decisions at all. Genetic predispositions toward specific failure modes, the equivalent of clearing rocks from a field before you plant it. The human leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, the way someone leans when they want to make sure they're understood. The Velhari are what they are because of what Velhari did, the choices, the building, the fighting. We cleared some rocks. You built the civilization. Those are not the same thing. Zyrath stood there. He thought about the rock clearing. He thought about what the rocks might have been. He thought about the species the file described before the first intervention, aggressive past the point of governance, too fractured to cooperate, pointed toward a specific kind of extinction that had nothing to do with outside forces and everything to do with their own worst tendencies. He thought about the conquered, the empire that species had built, the 41 civilizations they had united and governed and fought alongside, the thing they had made over 10,000 years. He thought, maybe that is what you get when someone believes enough in what you might become to clear the rocks before you arrive. You almost didn't make it yourselves, he said. Not a question. He'd read enough of the human logs to know. No, the human said, quiet. The single syllable carried something heavy and old. Not shame, not pride, just the specific weight of something true that has been true for a long time. We almost didn't, several times. But you did. But we did. They looked at each other across 12,000 years of distance that was now, in this room, this moment, no distance at all. Sane, who had arrived an hour ago and positioned herself near the archive terminal at the chamber's east wall, watched the two of them and thought about the word the logs had used again and again. The word that had taken her 6 days to make peace with, and that she still wasn't entirely at peace with and might not be for years. Garden. She thought about what gardens were for, not the tending, not the work of keeping them alive, what they were asterisk for at the end, the reason you made one. Not to own, not to control, not to keep forever under your hand. To walk through, to sit in, to see what grew. The youngest counselor asked quietly, almost to himself, "What are you called, your species?" The human turned to look at him. "You already know," the human said. "It's in your files, it's always been in your files." The data chip sat on the table. The full archive, 12,000 years of it, ready to be received. The hidden network waited, keys offered. The entire infrastructure of a civilization's longest and most patient project held out like an open hand. The Pelhari counselor reached out and picked up the data chip. He held it for a moment. Just held it, the weight of 12,000 years in something small enough to close a fist around. Then he looked at the human and asked the only thing left to ask. "What do we do now?" The human smiled. It was not a complicated smile, not triumphant, not relieved, not carrying any of the things a smile might carry when you have just completed the longest project in your civilization's history. Just a smile. The kind that belongs to someone who is genuinely happy to be here in this room with these people at this moment. "Whatever you want," the human said, "that's the point." In every conquered world, in every system, in every corner of 6 galaxy arms, the hidden network was transmitting its last automated signal before it transitioned to conquered control. The final item in the human data package. The thing delivered last, because it was the thing that needed to come last. Not science, not history, not maps or medicine or engineering. A message. Short, 11 words. Written 12,000 years ago by a woman who had not known if she would ever wake up to see if it was received, and who had written it anyway. "We hope you like what you've become." Earth. 41 civilizations received it simultaneously, in their own languages, translated carefully and correctly, because whoever had built the translation matrix had had 12,000 years to get it right. The galaxy had burned. Not in fire. In the particular and irreversible way things burn when they are finally, completely seen.